Senator Natash Akpabio, who, of course, has come under fire. I know I spoke to a guest of ours when that happened, and Dr. Frank had the Senate president to blame. But then, there has been more blames nationally. Well, it's been on both sides of the coin. The Senate president has taken his. Senator Natash Akpabio has also come under a lot of fire. There has even been, women in the career space that have, put her under the radar and said this is unacceptable. And that's something, people are free to hold their different views. But yeah, but she has faced the Senate disciplinary panel after her altercation with Senator Akpabio. And there is a video that we would take excerpts from that, and that video credit, of course, is to AIT. But we'll take that video this morning.
That we should refer the entirety of the saga to our ethics, code of conduct, and public petitions to revert back to us. But let me just read this for the record. Even the first time the issue came up here, our distinguished sister was not even speaking from her seat. And that was when we tried to call her to order. I think part of the problem is when people come from court declared senators, they miss the orientation. The management of the National Assembly is hereby ordered to organize periodic orientation, particularly for senators who are midstreamers, who came midstream and did not start when their colleagues started. Because I remember that this particular senator, on the day she was sworn in, raised her hand to speak. I was scared, but I had to recognize her because I was saying, you just gave her the rule book. Part of what we give to you when you are sworn in is the standing order of the Senate. So I said, has she even opened the rule book to know what she's going to say? But she made the contribution on that day. I think 2 days later, she brought a motion. There's nothing wrong in being vibrant, but there's a lot wrong when you don't know anything about the procedure. You can't be a reverend father and go and start the church service with communion. You must lay foundation. So let me refer you to section 66 of our rule book. Section 66, subsection 1. It says, the president of the Senate or the chairman, maybe while sitting as chairman of committee of the whole, after having called the attention of the Senate or of the committee to the conduct of a senator who persists in irrelevance or tedious repetition, either of his own arguments or of the argument used by other senators in debate, may direct him to discontinue his speech. So even when you are talking, the Senate President has a right to ask you to discontinue your speech. And then section 66(2) says, if such a senator refuses to resume his or her seat, this is the first time the rule book is even referring to her, the President of the Senate, or in the case of sitting as chairman of committee of the whole, shall order such a senator whose conduct is grossly disorderly to withdraw immediately from the Senate during the remainder of that day's sitting. The President of the Senate shall order such a senator to withdraw in the event that he views her conduct or his conduct to be disorderly. And then section 66(2) says, if such a senator refuses to resume his or her seat, this is the first time the rule book is even referring to her.
All right, then, just taking the visuals and hearing Senator Godswill Akpabio, who is the chief of the Senate, speaking to the conduct of Senator Natasha Akpoti and the need to institute an orientation, periodic orientation for senators in the National Assembly, just in case you forget a bit where you are, or the rules and regulations guarding the activities of the Senate. But of course, there are several reactions to there are several reactions even to the fact that she stood to the disciplinary committee. One thing we must take home is the fact that the Senate president has talked about the fact that there is a rule book, there is a code of conduct rule book that is given to every senator that comes into the House, and also establishing the fact that even on her first day, just being sworn in into the National Assembly, she was already up and about trying to speak. It also begs to a question on the personality of Natasha Akpoti. She's someone that is able to follow through with order, and that's a serious concern. But something catchy in the excerpt of the video clip we've just watched from the Senate President is the fact that he referred to her as a court-declared senator. Now, he did not specifically say that to her. He said the problem we have with these, courts, declared senators is they have already missed the orientation that was done for their colleagues. But some persons are reacting that is disrespectful to the people that she represents in the National Assembly. I don't know whether you also buy that. We'll put our phone lines up on the screen and we can take reactions this morning. Francis, what are your thoughts?
Well, I like to come from a different perspective. First, reacting to the Senate President's speech, it is true that when you are elected into office, there is orientation being given. And a part of the need for that orientation is to get the elected official acquainted with the workings, with the processes, with the procedures, with the order of things, the progression of things within the office that you find yourself. As far as the National Assembly is concerned, there are those laid down processes and procedures, and there is a rule book which is being prepared ahead of time. So as you get in at the orientation, you're being handed, and it is your duty to study. Oh yeah, we've seen several times where House of Assembly members, National Assembly members, they stand up in the House and they want to talk, and they don't know what to say to even get to the point they want to make. That's because they were not given proper orientation. That's because even those who were given proper orientation obviously were sleeping when that orientation was being given. So you stand up in a place that is supposed to be ordered, and you don't know what point of order to raise, what particular section of the rule book to quote to be able to speak, and then air your views about your constituency. That is clearly unacceptable. It's not done in any parliament anywhere in the world. So I kind of agree with the Senate President when he said there is a need for training. However, to those who are upset about the phrase or the sentence, court-declared senators, definitely that goes back to our institutions. I mean, it's been long-standing. There are instances where we've seen people who were elected getting to start at the National Assembly, and then midway down the line, another senator comes in, declared by the court. So it is not something that is going to stop. But I think the Senate President was trying to draw attention to the fact that if this person had come in with the rest of her colleagues, she probably would have had the training and would not have what is happening now. Now, that is on one end. But we see Natasha has already sued the Senate President and is demanding over, I think, 100 million in damages. And she's claiming that 100.2 billion naira in damages. She's claiming defamation by the Senate President. And of course, he said she resisted the relocation leading to, which led to the confrontation based on her fundamental right. Now, in a suit filed before the Federal High Court Territory Court yesterday, February 25, the President of the Senate, the senior legislative aide to the President, Form Patrick, were listed as the first and the second and the third respondent. Now, of course, we saw Victor Giwa, who is the representative of Natasha Akpabio alleged defamatory statements were made by the Senate President and published by his aide on Facebook. The post, titled Local Content Committee of the Senate, Natasha's, is this Local Content Committee of the Senate, Natasha's birthright. Okay, that is where they are citing instances. So, remember, yeah, when this surfaced, there were insinuations that, oh, it must have been some water underground, some dealings underneath the surface that makes it look like, oh, there's a problem, and Natasha is. And if we have to quote Senator Natasha, she did say the Senate President has been victimizing her, has been targeting her, has been, marginalizing her. So from this statement now, we can now come to see where that grievances is coming from. So if you were before now the chairman of the Local Content Committee and you are removed from that position for whatever reason the Senate President has, by the standing orders of the Senate, committees are given by the Senate President. Whoever becomes chair, they are decided upon by members of the National Assembly. So if they have sat down and they said from the excuse that the Senate leadership gave for why Natasha was removed from being chairman is because she did not understand the workings of the committee. She did not understand the operations of the committee. Other members of the Senate who were part of that committee found it difficult to work with her because of a lack of understanding. Now, if that is the case, there is no country, there is no leader who would sit down and see that a very sensitive committee such as that is entrusted into the hands of somebody who lacks the competence and has failed to take the necessary steps to address the concerns that have been raised by her colleagues. So, if that is the case, it means you were justly removed from a position. And obviously, we know that when you hold a portfolio, it boosts the morale, it boosts the CV of the senator in question. When you are in charge of different committees, it also speaks to how much of presence you have. And also, when we talk about the ranking of legislators or National Assembly members, you're looking at what committee are you involved in, what activities are you involved in outside of your constituency normal duties, outside of that. So from this perspective now, one can understand why Natasha Akpabio would react the way she did. But then the Senate President and the National Assembly have given their justification for removing you, and I leave it for the court to decide whether or not that image or that word, those sentences that were said, amounts to defamation of Natasha's character. You're just being told the truth. If this is your birthright, because you spoke to the fact that you're being marginalized, you're being victimized, and it all ties to the fact that you've been removed from this. So it's a matter of you did not perform according to the Senate leadership, and then we remove you and brought in somebody who can perform in that role, and then you feel you're being victimized, you're being targeted. But you have failed to also note that there are procedures that you could not. If you are in the National Assembly and you are in a committee, it is expected that you're going to be able to work with your colleagues. If that committee is going to have his mandate delivered, and if you can't work with your colleagues, definitely you fail as a leader. And if you fail as a leader, there is no need for you to stay.
Well, having a document that, it's about a 169-page document that literally explains what is expected of you as a senator in the National Assembly, when you should do what, how you should do what, why you should do what. It's been explained, in the Senate standing orders that every member of the National Assembly has. But just like a lot of Nigerians, we get manuals and we really never study these manuals. We just get them and then we throw them somewhere, on our tables, but we never sit down to study them. Like I said with the tenancy issue, as a senator representing your people, where does your right start and where does yours stop? Where does the Senate President's rights start and where does his own stop? These are things that are enshrined in the Senate standing orders. And if for any reason you're flagging any of these rules, you would literally expect whatever comes to you. The other flip side would be, okay, do we expect that people are spoken to with regard, with respect, while, any senior colleague is speaking. Yes, that is expected, but, certain things must not be blown overboard. So that we are not sentimental about the conversation. It's not now a matter of, the Senate president versus, female politicians, or Senate president because he's from XYZ place and the senators from. You have to look into the tenets of order in the Senate. Did she step out of line? My key issue with this is, was Senator Akpoti the only senator to be moved around that day? The answer is no. She wasn't the only senator that was moved around that day for the particular reason that, the Senate had moved others. You're going to ask, were others sent prior notice? Because that was part of her argument, that she was not consulted. She had not been told. Were others consulted and she was exempted? Maybe that would be grounds. But then we would not think that others were, told. It's just about making mountain out of molehills, and like we have established this morning, it's stemming from another grievance that possibly had nothing to do with the seat that day, but she found that opportunity to flare up. But there are very serious orders as to how things had to be done. There's a lot of order.
There's a lot
of order.
But I think where I have issues, and I would agree with, Natasha and her lawyer, would be part of the declaration that the stated came credited to the Senate president. And it's, I like to quote, he said, "It is a bottled anger by the Kogi lawmaker who knows nothing about legislative rules." Yes, she knows nothing about legislative rules, judging from all the explanations that has been given. I mean, if you've not studied the rule book of the House and you're not able to deal with the different orders that should guide your operations within the National Assembly, you obviously do not know anything about legislative rules, which means there is need for you to be schooled properly for you to continue serving your people. Now, where I have some level of aligning with that thought is the other statement, which paints her in a bad light, and obviously the Senate president shouldn't have gone there. And he said, she thinks being a lawmaker is all about pancaking her face and wearing transparent outfit to the chambers. According to the declaration, used and written by the third defendant at the prompting of the first and second defendant, is defamatory and intended to cause public uproar and disaffection towards the claim. Now, this is credited to a post made on Facebook by Patrick and Fawn, and they are directly alleging that this came from the Senate president. So, you see that thing where we say, when your subordinate misbehave, the problem comes back to you. This clearly could have been Patrick Mfon just writing as an aide to the president, to the Senate president. But now, the legal representative of Senator Natasha is saying this comes from Senate president through his head, made public on social media. Now, this comment definitely has some undertone of an insult to the personality of not just Senator Natasha, but every other female. I mean, it was the Senate president who described Nigerian women as full package women. How can you have a full package woman who is not well tushed up? How can you have a full package woman who is not well within her feminine, graces? So you are not going to be able to say those kinds of words. When you begin to paint those kinds of pictures, that means you want senators, you want politicians who are women to dress like their male counterparts. You can't have a woman who is not a man. You literally, let's go back to the embattled Dr. Beta Edu. We used to see her. Are you going to talk about all the female politicians, all the female appointees, and how they dress? So Natasha is not the first, not the second, neither will she be the last to dress in the wear and manner that she dresses to the National Assembly. So when you go making those sexist statements, definitely there's a big problem there. And, I think that this is left for the court to decide and determine whether it was the Senate president or the aide who erred in the process of trying to defend his boss, and then also making those statements. But that is where they got it wrong. You could speak to the incompetence, you could speak to the fact that she has not been able to have a full grasp of what is supposed to happen in the National Assembly without being a sexist, without trying to paint the wrong picture about her dresses. Because this is like literally painting her in the wrong light.
Well, there is a lot to unearth, where this, story is coming out from. But just to keep our reactions in check, it's important that we, take a sneak peek into what the order of the House is. Did she go against those orders? Because you have to look at the fact that other senators are actually backing the Senate president on this. Remember, if we didn't call up that video this morning. If you go back to the video that trended last week, you would see the fact that, other senators around her were begging, asking her to calm down and all of that. But then she still insisted. At the end of the day, you're talking about the lawsuit and in light of the disciplinary committee that she has faced, other senators are, on the side of the Senate president. Is there possibility of this changing if the lawsuit goes on? Are there more women that get on the side of Natasha to say, okay, hey, look, there has been issues with the Senate president, but every now and then we've heard, the Senate presidents, throw out underhanded comments about people. Generally, it's not even just about the women folk. The men also get it, when he's speaking. So is that something that the Senate president needs to school himself on and make sure that his conversations are geared towards what exactly he's saying? But others would also argue that the man is human and has a sense of humor and, has brought that in. I mean, you would never forget when he was governor of Akpabio State. The man sold us with, his vivaciousness. So there is, that also is something about the personality of the man in question. But to what extent does this breach the code and standing orders of the Senate is what is the bone of contention. Moving this on to a defamation of character conflict in the courts of jurisdiction, in the courts of law, well, it's the courts that would have to, decide upon reviewing the facts that will be brought before them. The evidence that will be brought before them to decide whether or not the Senate president is found culpable to the tune of 100 billion naira as compensation for that. We'll wait and see what it means. The controversy still brews on. Now there is a court, there's a court case in as a result of this. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. Her suspension hasn't yet been lifted. She has faced the disciplinary committee and would just wait and see where all of this goes in the time to come.